Until I was about 25, I lived in a beach town called Horizon Bay. My neighborhood wasn't far from the ocean, just a 20-minute walk. You could always smell the salt in the air, hear the waves crashing from my porch. It was the kind of place where you felt like part of the sea. 80% of my personality was beach-related. If I wasn't surfing, I was swimming, or just lying in the sand. From the moment I could stand, I was on a board. Surfing was in my blood. It was more than a hobby. It was a lifestyle. Some of my earliest memories are of my dad taking me out on the waves, holding me close as I balanced on the board for the first time, feeling the rush of the water beneath my feet. We'd come back to the shore, salty and sunburned, and sit there for hours, watching the tides. But there's one thing the beach taught me that I never expected to learn. Some things, no matter how well you think you know them, are unpredictable. It was a summer day, just like any other. The sun was high. The sand was warm beneath my feet. I'd just finished a surf session, nothing special. The waves were perfect, and I was feeling good. The type of day that makes you think everything in the world is fine. But as I walked back up the beach, something felt off. It wasn't a sense of danger, not exactly. More like a strange pressure in the air, the kind of quiet that makes you aware of the smallest noises. Even the seagulls seemed distant. I remember thinking it was just my imagination, but the feeling stayed with me. It was like the world was holding its breath. I shrugged it off, probably just exhaustion from the waves. Later that evening, I was hanging out with some friends by the beach bonfire. We had our usual crowd, people who lived for the ocean, surfers and beach lovers. But there was someone new, Jacob. He was older than the rest of us, probably in his late 30s. Tall, dark hair, rough hands, like he'd worked hard his whole life. He didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened. Jacob wasn't from Horizon Bay. He had been traveling up the coast for the past few weeks, and we all assumed he was just another traveler passing through. But there was something about him, something unsettling. Not in the way he looked, but in the way he talked. His stories always seemed to drift toward the sea, but not in a romantic way. He told us about the deeper parts of the ocean, places even experienced divers never went. He'd seen things there, he said, strange, unexplainable things. He'd mentioned hearing whispers beneath the water, seeing shadows that weren't fish. Everyone just laughed it off. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Jacob's words than just stories. The next morning, I went out for a surf by myself. I always preferred it that way, just me and the waves. The beach was still quiet, a perfect morning, but something felt wrong. It was like I was being watched. I shook it off again, focusing on the ocean, trying to clear my head. But just as I paddled out past the breakers, I saw something strange. Out in the distance, there was a dark shape in the water. It wasn't a boat. It wasn't a person. It was something huge. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze in place. The shape was moving, slowly, as though it was floating just beneath the surface. I paddled closer, thinking it was a whale or some large marine animal. But the closer I got, the more the shape seemed to shift. It didn't move like a living creature should. I turned around and paddled back to shore. Fast. My heart was pounding in my chest. When I got out of the water, I felt a sharp coldness in my body, despite the hot sun. I didn't tell anyone about what I saw. It didn't feel like something that should be spoken about. The next day, Jacob was gone. Just disappeared. I didn't think much of it at first. He was a traveler, after all. Maybe he just decided to head somewhere else. But when a few days passed and no one had heard from him, people started to talk. Some said they saw him walking along the beach late at night, when the moon was high. But no one had seen him leave town. Then there were rumors. People said he had been down by the cliffs, near the old pier, just before he vanished. They said he'd been muttering to himself, staring out at the ocean like he was waiting for something. I wasn't sure what to think, but that strange feeling I had on the water kept growing, like the ocean itself was hiding something from me. A week passed, and then another. The town organized a search. Volunteers combed the beach, the cliffs, even the nearby caves, but there was no sign of Jacob. It was like he had vanished into thin air. Some people even said they heard things in the night. The sound of someone calling out from the water, distant voices carried by the wind. Then, I got a call from a friend of mine who had been helping with the search. He sounded frantic. "Have you heard? They found something in the cave by the pier. You need to come see." I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my board and headed down there. When I arrived, the police were already there, and a small group of volunteers had gathered, talking in hushed voices. The cave was dark, and I could feel a strange heaviness in the air. They led me to the back of the cave, and that's when I saw it. There, partially submerged in the water, was a body. Jacob's body. But there was something wrong about it. His eyes were wide open, and his face was twisted in a look of pure terror. His arms were outstretched, as if he had been reaching for something. But the most unsettling part, there was something in the water near him, something dark, moving beneath the surface. I don't know how to explain it, but as I stood there, looking at Jacob's lifeless body, I could feel the ocean itself staring back at me. They said it was an accident, that Jacob had somehow drowned. But I knew the truth. I knew that what he had seen in the ocean, whatever he had been talking about, it was real. There are things in the water, things we're not meant to understand. After that day, I couldn't bring myself to surf. The ocean no longer felt like a friend. It felt like something darker, something that was watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. And sometimes, when the night is still and the air is thick with that same strange pressure, I can hear it, whispers on the wind, faint, but there, calling me back. I don't go near the water anymore, not since Jacob. Maybe the ocean is more than we think. Maybe it's not just water, but something far older, far more dangerous than we can ever understand. It was the summer of 2015, and my best friend, Ethan, and I were both 19 years old. We were lucky, born into families that had the means to enjoy summers down at a beautiful beach town called Silver Sands, just outside of Atlantic City, the kind of place where the sun always seemed to shine. The waves were perfect, and the nights were warm and filled with laughter. It was the kind of summer most people only dream of, and we took full advantage of it. Ethan and I had been friends since we were kids. He was the kind of guy who could always make you laugh, always ready for an adventure. He was the type who got everyone's attention without even trying. And I wasn't as outgoing, but I had something that he didn't. I was a little more cautious, a little more aware of the things most people ignored. I wasn't paranoid, just careful, and we balanced each other out perfectly. That summer, we were both just looking to have fun, surfing every morning, hanging out at the beach in the afternoons, and grabbing a burger or two by the pier at night. Life was simple, and for the first time, we felt free. But, as we would soon learn, sometimes freedom comes at a price. One evening, after a long day of surfing, we decided to head down to a quieter part of the beach. Not many people went that far down. It was about a mile from the main strip, where the lights and bars crowded together. We liked it that way. Peaceful, just the sound of the waves crashing, no one to bother us. It was about 8 p.m., and the sun was just beginning to set. There's something about the way the sky turns orange and pink that always felt magical to me. But that night, As the last light dipped below the horizon, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I tried to brush it off. It was just the kind of eerie calm you get when the day is ending, right? But the feeling wouldn't go away. And Ethan, he wasn't worried at all. He was always the more carefree one. He grabbed his board, checked the waves one last time, and paddled out. I watched him go for a while, keeping an eye on him, even though I was supposed to be relaxing. The moon was coming up, casting silver light over the water. The waves weren't too big, but there was a strange stillness to them, like the ocean was holding its breath. Minutes passed, and something in the air felt heavier. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore seemed to fade, replaced by an eerie silence. I couldn't help myself. I had to check on Ethan. I called out his name a couple of times, but my voice seemed swallowed by the wind. There was no reply. At first I thought maybe he was just too far out. He was always pushing himself to catch bigger waves, so I figured he was just lost in the surf. But as I got closer to the water's edge, something didn't feel right. That's when I saw it. Ethan's surfboard, bobbing gently in the water, but he was nowhere in sight. I froze for a moment, my heart skipping a beat. I rushed into the water, panic starting to creep in. I called his name again, louder this time. Still no response. I scanned the dark water, my mind racing. Could he be stuck in a riptide? I knew the ocean could be dangerous, but this wasn't something we had planned for. This wasn't just the usual surf accident. Something was wrong. I spent what felt like an eternity searching, my legs getting tired, my lungs burning from yelling, but there was nothing. No sign of Ethan. That's when I started to feel it, like the water was pulling at me. It wasn't a riptide, not in the usual way. This was different. It felt like something was guiding me away from the shore. I struggled against it, but it kept pulling harder. Then, just as I thought I couldn't fight it any longer, I heard it. A faint cry. I turned, trying to pinpoint the sound. It came from further out, too far for me to swim on my own. My heart raced as I realized it was Ethan. Somehow he was still alive. But when I looked closer, I saw it. Something was in the water, with him. At first I thought it was a trick of the light. But no. There was something in the water, something large. It moved beneath the surface too fast for me to make out. I couldn't tell what it was, only that it was circling Ethan, like a predator. Fear slammed into my chest. I yelled for help, but there was no one around, no lights in sight. The beach was completely empty. I wanted to dive in, to save my friend, but the fear, the instinct to run, it held me back. I was paralyzed with fear, watching helplessly as the thing circled Ethan. Suddenly, Ethan appeared at the surface, gasping for air. His face was pale, eyes wide with terror. He didn't look at me. He didn't even try to reach the shore. He just kept looking over his shoulder, eyes wide, like he was seeing something I couldn't. Then, without warning, he vanished beneath the water. I didn't even think. I just dove in. I don't remember much of what happened after that. I remember the water felt colder than I'd ever known. And I remember struggling, trying to fight whatever force was pulling me down, trying to find Ethan. But the deeper I went, the more I felt like something was watching me. Something was out there waiting. Finally, I came up for air, gasping, my body shaking with exhaustion. That's when I saw Ethan's surfboard, floating near the shoreline. The rest of the night is a blur. I was barely able to make it back to shore, disoriented and gasping for breath. I didn't know what happened to Ethan, but he was never seen again. When I was finally able to talk to the authorities, I told them everything. The strange feeling in the air, the creature I'd seen beneath the surface. But they didn't believe me. They said it was probably a shark or a trick of the light. They told me to move on. But I never could. To this day, I can't explain what happened out there. All I know is that the ocean hides things we aren't meant to understand. And every time I see the waves, I can't help but wonder what was in the water that night. And did it take Ethan? Or was it something else? Beaches have always terrified me. Not always, but ever since one particular summer, the fear has clung to me. As a child, I adored the shore. Every summer, I eagerly anticipated weekends spent at our family beach house. The feeling of sand under my toes, the salty breeze on my face, and the sound of waves crashing was my idea of paradise. If I was lucky, I'd get to spend weekends at my best friend Danny's beach house instead. It was even better. His family was more laid back, and there was always an air of excitement at their place. I was 15 the summer it happened. Danny had invited me and our friend Ryan to stay over for a few nights at his family's beach house. Ryan was a year older than us and had just gotten his license, so he was driving us down in his dad's old station wagon. The drive itself was half the fun. Ryan wasn't exactly a confident driver yet, so the three of us spent the ride laughing as he swerved and cursed at every curve and turn. We got to the house by mid-afternoon. The place was perfect. A 2-story house sitting right along a lagoon, the water glimmering in the sun. The back of the house faced the narrow channel with a dock that stretched out over the water. There was a sliding glass door that opened to the backyard and an outdoor staircase that led up to a second-floor deck connecting the bedrooms. The layout was open and inviting, perfect for a summer getaway. After unpacking our bags, we were already plotting how to make the most of our time there. At that age, chasing girls was a top priority. Danny pulled out his phone and started messaging some girls we knew from school, trying to see who might be around. We found 3 girls, Emma, Tara, and Rachel, who were also spending the weekend down the shore and were more than happy to come hang out. By the time the girls arrived, we'd already set the mood. A playlist of our favorite songs blasting from the speakers, a stash of weed we'd brought along, and a few bottles of alcohol we'd snuck from our parents' cabinets. It was shaping up to be the perfect night. The 6 of us laughed, flirted, and made plans for the rest of the weekend. At some point, someone suggested we move to the backyard pool. It was small, but just big enough for all 6 of us. We piled in, the water warm and inviting under the cool night air. The music played softly in the background, and steam rose gently from the heated water. The smell of weed mixed with the salty breeze as we passed a joint around. It was one of those moments that felt timeless, like it would stay frozen in your memory forever. But then, something shifted. Danny turned the music all the way down, his expression suddenly serious. He was staring over my shoulder, out toward the lagoon. Confused, I turned to see what he was looking at, but all I could make out were the houses on the other side of the water, their lights dimmed for the night. "What is it?" Emma asked, her voice breaking the silence. Danny didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "I think I saw someone standing on the dock across the lagoon." I laughed, thinking he was trying to mess with us. "So what? People live here. It's probably just one of the neighbors." Danny shook his head. "Number, I know the family that lives there. My parents said they're in Florida for the week." The girls exchanged nervous glances. "Can we go inside?" Tara asked. "This is freaking me out." Not wanting to kill the vibe, I tried to laugh it off again. "Come on, it's nothing. Probably just a shadow or something." But Danny's expression didn't change. "I know what I saw," he muttered. Reluctantly, we started climbing out of the pool, grabbing towels to dry off. That's when Ryan froze, his eyes wide as he stared toward the lagoon. "Holy," he started, but the words caught in his throat. The rest of us turned to look. Even in the dim light, I could see movement on the opposite dock. It wasn't just one figure anymore. There were 4. Tall, shadowy silhouettes standing at the edge of the dock, their bodies unnaturally still, all facing in our direction. My heart started pounding. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was just some people hanging out, but something about the way they stood there, silent and unmoving, felt wrong. "Get inside," Danny said, his voice low. We rushed trembling toward the sliding glass door. We didn't need to be told twice. And as we did, the sound hit us. 4 loud splashes, one after the other. They were in the water, swimming toward us. The girls screamed, and Ryan slammed the sliding door shut, locking it as quickly as he could. Danny ran to the front of the house to lock that door, too, while the rest of us huddled in the living room, our hearts racing. For a few minutes, everything was silent except for our ragged breathing and the distant sound of waves. We sat there, frozen, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But the silence stretched on, heavy and oppressive. Then Ryan swore under his breath. "The deck door. I forgot to lock the sliding door upstairs." Danny's face paled. "Are you kidding me?" Before we could decide what to do, we heard it. Soft, deliberate footsteps on the deck above us. My stomach dropped. They were inside. We didn't have a plan. We didn't have any weapons. And we were all too intoxicated to think clearly. Our only option was to run. "Go," Danny whispered. "Now." We bolted for the front door, tearing it open and sprinting toward Ryan's car, parked in the driveway. In his panic, Ryan fumbled with the keys, dropping them once before finally getting the door unlocked. We piled in, shouting for him to start the engine. He floored it, backing out so fast that he took out Danny's mailbox in the process. We didn't stop driving until we were miles away. Only then did we call the police, telling them everything that had happened. The officers said they'd send a unit to check out the house and told us to stay put. When they finally called us back, the news wasn't good. The intruders were gone, but they'd left their mark. The upstairs had been ransacked, valuables stolen. Worse, Danny's family's boat, a medium-sized Boston whaler, was missing from the dock. The spare key had been hidden in a small compartment below the steering wheel, and somehow the thieves had known exactly where to find it. The police said it was likely a planned robbery, that the intruders knew the house was supposed to be vacant. They suspected it was someone who knew Danny's family, someone who knew their habits and routines. But they never caught anyone, and the case went cold. It's been years since that night, but the memory is as vivid as ever. I don't know who or what those figures were, or how they seemed to move so deliberately, so silently. But I do know this: I haven't felt safe at a beach since. And every night, before I go to bed, I double-check every lock in my house. Do yourself a favor. Lock your doors at night. You never know who might be watching.